Hi guys, in this video I'll cover if conditions. I first go over the different comparison operators, then I explain the syntax, and finally I give some examples. Let's start out with the different comparison operators. Each comparison operator compares two values. The first operator checks if the first value is less than the second value. The second operator checks if the first value is less than or equal to the second value. Two equal signs check for equality. It checks if the first value is equal to the second value. Note that this is not a single equal sign, which means assignment. So a single equal sign takes a value on the right hand side and assigns it to a variable on the left hand side. Use two equal signs if you intend to compare two values. Not equal to is written with an exclamation mark followed by a single equal sign. Then there's larger than or equal to and larger than. Now that you know the different comparison operators, let's focus on the syntax. The syntax starts out with a if keyword followed by parentheses and then a code block defined by braces. Inside the parentheses is a condition. If this condition is true, this code block will be entered. This code block is also called the then block. And this block can have any number of statements, one or multiple. It can even have conditions or any other kind of code structures. Now, if this condition is true, these statements are executed. If this condition is false, however, these statements are skipped. And the statements after the if block are executed. So if this is true, it will execute all the statements in the then block, continue execution after. If this is false, it will skip the entire block and continue with the statements after. Sometimes you also see the then block not explicitly defined. So it's a condition followed by a statement. Note that this statement doesn't necessarily need to be indented. For good code quality, it should always be indented. But if it's not, it still belongs to the if condition. So if this condition is true, the very first statement following it will be executed. If this condition is false, it will not be executed, regardless of the indentation. It's always best to declare the code block with braces. But if you don't, always add an indentation. Also be aware to not write a semicolon after the if condition. This means an empty statement. And what this essentially does is, if this condition is true, it will execute the empty statement, meaning it doesn't do anything. And then follow the statement that are following. If this condition is false, it will skip the execution of the empty statement and follow the statement after. The same applies for the code block up here. If I put a semicolon here, regardless what the condition is, the statements in this block will always be executed because this block no longer belongs to the condition. Now it's a condition that does not have an explicit code block. It only has a single statement, which is the empty statement. So do not write a semicolon after the if condition. Next, let's take a look at an example. I comment these out. And in the first example, I take a character that stores a letter. I print the user to enter a letter. And then I read the input into the variable. Now I want to check if the user entered capital A. So I use a condition if letter equal, remember it's two equal signs, and I'm working with characters, so I have to use single quotes, and then capital A. If this is true, I output you entered A. If this is not true, I write a statement after this called next. Now let's execute this program. So I'm prompted with the letter, I enter K. And you can see next was outputted. That means the then block was skipped. Now running this again, and I enter capital A, it executes the condition. Letter is currently capital A. It compares capital A to A. This is true, so the condition now is true, and it enters the then block. So it executed this statement here. It outputted, you entered A. After this, it continued execution after the if condition. Let's add another example. I add a variable to the variable declarations at the top called A. This is an integer. Then I prompt the user to enter a number, and I read that into my integer variable. And now I want to check if the user entered a positive value. So I check if A is larger than 0. If this is the case, I output you entered a positive integer. And after this, I output a statement, the end. Now I execute this again. For the character, I just enter lowercase a. So lowercase a is not uppercase a, so it skips the then block here and outputs next, and then prompts for a number. Here I enter, let's say 5. So we'll execute the statement here. A is 5. 5 is larger than 0. This one is true. It enters the then block, executes this statement, and outputs you entered a positive integer. Then it continues execution after the if condition, and it outputs the end. Let's run this one more time. I output uppercase letter A. This is equal. It enters the then block, outputs the statement, outputs the next statement, and then it prompts for a number. Here I enter -2. It compares -2 to 0. -2 is not larger than 0, so this condition is false. It will not enter the then block and continue execution after the if condition. It outputs the end. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you get a good understanding of if conditions. Thank you for watching.